Okay, welcome everyone. Today's guest is an awesome entrepreneur and educator, Ann McCormick. Ann, welcome to our podcast. Let's kind of dive right into it. And where did your passion for education start?
It started when I was a little child living on a farm and went to school and thought, wow, this is really neat. I was very isolated on my farm. There were no other children. And I just thought the idea of becoming a teacher was great. So I decided to do that when I was 5 in kindergarten. And then I grew up and began teaching in college and got a teaching credential, taught in East Buffalo in New York. And at that time, it was just after a riot, and I saw so many problems for the kids. I wanted to do something about it. So I went to Berkeley and got my PhD in education and started working all over the country in projects for poverty area kids. And then thought, well, the government printing office published our work on replicating very low income school successful projects, but nobody bought them in particular. I mean, maybe very few. And it was a $5 million project. So I thought it would be great to capture all that I learned in those projects about learning being customized and colorful and playful and interactive to do software. So I started a software company to do that. But it was 1978, and computers were very limited then. There was no hard drive, 6 colors and high res, etc. But I've done it ever since, trying to help solve the problem of my kids in East Buffalo and all the kids like them. I worked in East St. Louis, Chula, Mississippi, East Oakland. I was just aware that it wasn't fair. So I wanted to make a fair way that children could learn.
Amazing.
That's how I started.
And can you take us back to when you founded the learning company and one of your most well-known products, Reader Rabbit? How did you identify learning company and Reader Rabbit as a solution you could bring to the market? What inspired that?
Well, I started the learning company. I would have gone to work at an educational software company, except the only one that I knew of did paragraphs and questions. It was a computer-assisted instruction company. And my vision for education was to have interactive graphical interface. And it was really the first one. We started with a grant from Apple, and then people on the board of the Apple Foundation encouraged us to seek venture capital. And so I started the company out of Apple's giving me a computer and then having their board encourage me. It included Bob Noyce, who invented the chip. Steve Jobs had the idea of starting the foundation. There were very wonderful people who helped me begin when I barely had touched a computer with my own hands. But I saw, it wasn't that I saw a market opportunity, I saw a crying need among human beings, named children, for something that would work for them beyond what the very, very good schools could do.
Yeah. Tell us, it's such a fascinating story, and tell us a little bit about, raising capital and running an educational software company, something you probably never set out to do when you were a young child, but now all of a sudden you have this money and you're trying to run a company. Tell us about that experience.
Well, one of the members of, it's a really interesting thing how nonprofit boards can help. And the Apple Foundation was started by Steve Jobs, and he got incredibly good people on the board. So for marketing, the head of the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is a children's museum in Berkeley, came to me and said, "Can we market your product?" I was so thrilled. It's Arthur Lerman, who's very well known. And the vice president of development at Apple had become a venture capitalist. He approached me, and I had to call the head of the Apple Foundation and say, "What's venture capital?" I honestly didn't know. I had been a nun for 6 years. I was a teacher, and business was new to me. So they helped me write a business plan at Melcor Venture Management and invested $300,000 without my asking. And that's been true all the way through. People came to me and offered capital. I know it's unusual, but it just happened. However, I talked to everybody, and I became very well known. And I remember Dan Faustra, who was the first to get venture capital for software in that era, for personal software, which became VisiCorp, said I'd feel better if you had one line of code. And I made my own card at a print shop that said Ann McCormick, president. Well, I was the president of nobody, but I was really bold to just go do it. And it was because I saw a need for children. But it wasn't because I'd been to business school or I just really had a passion for children's learning, which I still carry. That is the priority for me, whatever I'm doing.
And if you were to assess what the educational system is like in the late 70s to 2016, why did you believe Reader Rabbit was those answers back then?
Well, it was a whole series. We had 16 products, and one was Reader Rabbit. It's very, very simple. It just teaches 3-letter words. Anyway, I thought that what I had learned in the studies all over the country in low-income schools showed that they needed very specific skills, and so I thought of the turning point skills that they needed, and I did what I could with the funding we got and just made software that I thought would meet the kids' needs. I feel like I'm not quite answering your question. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, it was more so, I know you said at the beginning where you didn't necessarily address a market need, you just saw a growing pain amongst children. It was more so around how you just identified that need, which I think you did a great job right there explaining.
Okay.
And you also, even if it wasn't a term back then, the lean startup methodology, which is really popular in the tech scene today, it sounds like you used a similar type of methodology just to get it off the ground and prove some validation that this is really working.
Yes, I worked for 2 years in my home with no pay, and then I worked with a series of consultants who came and went, each bringing something quite wonderful, but they couldn't sustain, having no pay. I had to learn what a computer could do, and I read all the manuals before I even got one. I got maybe 100 copies of the Intelligent Machine Journal and wrote every word down and found out from friends what they meant and looked them up. So I had to self-teach, I was self-taught about technology. And then one of my friends at the Lawrence Hall of Science, who at that time was Steve Jobs' girlfriend, told me that you have to define what the programmer needs to program. And another friend said you have to define every input and output. So I began making specs without ever having seen one. And luckily, I created something nobody had done. There really wasn't playful learning software at all at that time. So I invented a new category, and it became a leading national brand. But it was out of just trying to do something I knew would work, which is things being colorful and playful, and that the kids could see something they could laugh with. It was playful learning for the first time. It was very, very serious until then. Apple had one product called shell games, and the innovation was you could plug in your own words to go match column A to column B, set up hangman, and so forth. It was really serious little matching programs and stuff, but it wasn't a graphical interface, it was a text interface. So I was very fortunate to have a guy from Atari who'd done Atari Adventure join me, and he was a master of interactive graphics, and he worked with me and brought his brilliance from doing Atari Adventure to the Apple II, and he was brilliant at getting things into big code into tiny spaces, because he'd worked on the Atari VCS machine, which has like 100 bytes available. I don't know the exact number, but it was a tiny world, so we put amazing things in a tiny space. And as you can see, my attention was more on development than marketing, because I just wanted to create it, and then I hired other people to help market it.
And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts and opinions on the current education system and landscape right now in 2016, and of course, kind of leading into what are your current projects going on right now here in 2016?
Do you mean the educational software landscape or the K-12 landscape?
The K-12 landscape.
Well, we've come a long way in education, and I think that it's well known what works. It's just extremely hard to do. I'm on the board of a private school called Synapse in Menlo Park, and I feel they do it absolutely beautifully, which is a constructivist form of learning where children are doing things that are meaningful to them with very well qualified teachers in small classes. And this year they're studying the architect who built the glass pyramid outside of the Louvre, Chinese architect of incredible brilliance. And the whole school is doing it. There's just very inspired work going on. But in the public schools, they're weighted down by having to do testing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funded is the testing, not the solution. And it's hard for teachers to teach to those tests. And I feel like the whole schools, in general, the schools in the United States are weighted down by that. Some of the great ones are highlighted by the George Lucas Education Foundation, GLEF.org, and they do things like the Synapse School that are imaginative and playful and involving in a way that the children are engaged and become the agents of learning instead of being subject to being told something and repeating it or just doing matching tests and so forth. It's very different and freeing to be the agent of your own learning.
Anna, can you also tell us a little bit more about your current projects you're working on?
Sure. Well, my understanding from recent lists of levels of skills of kids in the United States is that a very large number of children, like 40%, can't read at grade level in 4th grade. And a large number of them end up illiterate in the US. So what I've focused on literacy as my main work. And I've just finished 9 apps in the Reader Beast series that are in the iOS App Store. They've won 15 national awards, including Parents' Choice Gold Award and many other wonderful awards. And like Reader Rabbit, Reader Bee focuses on a very key part of learning, which is realizing that there is such a thing as letters that make sounds, and you can put them together to make words. It's very playful and silly and wonderful, and that's what I've done in the last 3 years. I'm starting a new project now, which is not yet funded and which I'm looking for collaborators on, which is starting with very young children, like at birth, to retain the sounds of English all over the world so everybody can speak one language. English is the dominant language, or I would choose another one. Mandarin is second as far as first and second language users, and it's more localized, who knows it. English is used all over the world. So I want to make a toy, and I've approached a toy company about doing this with me, that makes it fun and silly. If you say goo goo, it says goose, and it helps the children retain the sounds of English as well as their native sounds and or their home language sounds. Because at about 6 months, I think we trim our neurons so that we don't have all the languages of the world, but just the ones of our home language. So I'm hoping to then pick up from there and make sure every child in the world is literate. And I think that's so core to the world being educated and being able to do things. And what I've seen working with the lowest income children for many, many years is they're absolutely brilliant, given a chance. They're not behind. It's just how you teach them. So I'm trying to teach them in the way I learned long ago that's colorful and playful, highly interactive, and has music and voice and responds to the child. So the child is in charge of the experience. The child feels agency, even when they're little, even if they tap something or bang something with their hand. So that's my new work, is literacy for the entire world and one language for the entire world. And I have some interest from some of the largest companies in the world. And I hope that we get this funded and we get people that know a great deal more than I do to help.
Yeah, and any listeners out there that are listening to this that are, social entrepreneurs and passionate educational entrepreneurs listening to this, Ann said it, she's looking for some collaborators. So, be proactive and connect with her if you're passionate about this literacy issue. And you mentioned something about a huge issue. I think you said 40% of fourth graders struggle to read. Was that the percentage you said?
They're significantly behind their skill level in fourth grade. That means they can't read. And if you look at the U.S. Department of Educational Statistics, they have, I think, 5 levels of literacy identified, from barely able to know an alphabet letter to fluency at a doctoral level. And the way I read it, about a third are functionally illiterate in the United States at a 6th grade level, but that cuts across their categories. So you can look for yourself and see the functional illiteracy problem. But I think this affects elections. It affects how we lead our lives, what choices we have, and a tremendous number of people hide their illiteracy, and they might be able to read a few words, but not read their prescriptions, not read. In prison, 98% are illiterate. They can't even read about their cases. There's just tremendous suffering around not being able to read. And I'd like to solve that starting at birth.
Well, I'm thinking about the bigger picture and how, like you mentioned, schools and the pressure of test prep. And I think test prep, testing really starts like the high stakes test starts in like 3rd grade.
Yes.
And if students, are struggling to read, taking that test, they're gonna most likely fail the test. That puts pressure on the teachers. That probably reduces confidence of the students. And there's a huge ripple effect from that.
Yes, I agree. I just wish the emphasis, I really believe in a sacred bottom line, and you need to test to see if kids can read. But the extent of it, I think, was motivated by other reasons than just trying to achieve competency. I think there should be some really simple sacred bottom lines and a clean path to getting to those, and then emphasize how to help the teachers make that happen. And by the way, because people, when they look at the market, they say, oh, parents only buy about 2 apps a year, 1 app a year. So they don't make enough to go from not reading to reading. They just don't exist. And there's some really nice little pieces, but very few are comprehensive, or if they are, they're not playful. So this is something that our society should solve. This shouldn't, more money goes to lipstick, many times as much money as to just trying to make sure little children can really read. And that can't just be motivated by profit. My new company is a nonprofit called Circle Time. And I think we have to do it as governments, as corporations, as individuals. There's private individuals who could do this in a heartbeat. So I welcome everybody to do that, but in a streamlined way. I've spent half my life writing grant proposals, winning grants. I've won a lot of government grants, foundation grants, but it takes so long and it's so tiny in scope. We need a unified effort.
So, Ann, I have a question regarding the root issue of some of those illiteracy statistics. Where does that stem from? Is it the schools are under budgeted, the teachers are underprepared? Is it home issues? What's causing a lot of that illiteracy?
I think there's misunderstanding on what the kids need, and it's in the educational materials. Then the teachers don't really know how to deliver them. Sometimes there's fabulous teachers. I don't want to put down teachers, but I just think it's not taught well. It's taught, for example, in kindergarten. Many kindergartners are asked to learn 100 sight words. Well, that violates the whole idea of phonics. There's systematic phonics helps kids actually learn to decode, which means read, take text and make sounds out of it, not as whole words, but in parts. They're also given the whole alphabet, and all of it has 44 sounds and 233 spellings. They aren't introduced to all of those in kindergarten, but a very great many of them. So what I did in Reader-Bee was just introduce lowercase 7 letters and 1 sound for each, and then put them together. So you can do hat, mat, sat, cat, ant. You can do a whole bunch of words with 7 letters, and then you do another 7, and you find them in stories. You do puzzle games with them. It's extremely consistent, like Greek used to be. So I just think we throw too much at little tiny children, and we're so used to it. Like, here's the whole alphabet. Well, that's gigantic. And to have more than one sound per letter, and little children like things one way. So there's uppercase and lowercase letters. That very concept is very hard. And then many just teach the uppercase. Well, they can't read that in a book very much. So I didn't introduce uppercase letters until we really had nailed the lowercase ones. And I let the children use each letter to start a sentence so they knew what they were for. You know, it just needs to be made a whole lot simpler and more playful. And so I just think we make it way, way too complicated. And some of the kids can come to school reading. We're not worried about them. But the ones that really need help, need a lot more. Also, I'd say probably 1 million children enter kindergarten without ever having had one story read to them. So all the efforts like Reading Rainbow, library reading programs, it's absolutely critical to introduce children to literature. And there are many good projects that do that, supplying books, reading books. But if you're not exposed to all those books, your vocabulary is much smaller. And that's another problem with low-income children. By the way, if a third of their parents can't read, they're not going to read to them. Imagine that. So Reading Rainbow is fabulous. There's a lot of way we can reach children. I taught a class at Ohio University at Athens, and my students went out to Appalachia to find out what children watched on television. The favorite program of little children, like kindergarten age, was boxing. Well, they've got one TV, and that's probably the dad's favorite, so that's what gets played. Sesame Street did a huge amount for that initial sense of letters and numbers to 20. But a lot of kids don't get to watch it. It did more than anything else I know of to impact very early literacy. But we need more. And I think interactive software is it. But just find something that takes a child from not reading to reading. Especially if you introduce phonics and the kids don't use the same sound system, that's a problem. My doctoral dissertation was on Black dialect and reading in first grade. And in my classes where I taped and made transcripts, the more dialect a child spoke, the harder it was to get those basic sounds. However, if a teacher could switch from really thorough dialect into standard English, style switch, and it was her native way of speaking, the kids' dialect scores went down and their reading scores went up. And that's why I think it's important to have the standard English sound system as well as your own home language. There might be a lot of opposition to that, but I think it's critical.
Looking towards the future, and say in 20 years, if everything goes exactly to plan and comes to fruition in your vision, what does this scene look like? What does education look like, and what does these reading skills look like if your plan came out?
Well, my plan is to serve children starting at birth until they are 8 years old, and then they can go from learning to read to reading to learn. So every child's going to come to school prepared and with basic literacy and math skills. We've got 2,400 math activities that go from counting to calculus. So we're doing math as well. And taken from a master teacher and the standards and so forth. But anyway, the result is there's competency in children before they begin. And it's all over the world, not just in the United States. So everybody has a good start. Remember Head Start. Well, it really delivers that. And, one finding is that parents need to be interested in the school and active to have the impact. So I think parents very much have to be involved, but my part is to make sure there's an interactive way all children can learn what they need. So the schools will have to change because a great deal of what they teach will already be known when children come to school.
Wow.
And then they can read the literature and the newspaper and original source materials and have their own projects where they're driving things. It just won't be like it is now with so many problems in the schools. When I taught school, I had kids, maybe 5 children, that could barely print their name in 5th grade, and they had failed 4 times by 5th grade. Well, they were in regular class, and they weren't going to make it. They were 13, and you had 1 more year before they went on to middle school, also not being able to read. I really feel for those teachers. It's hard to take them in when they failed 4 times, and then try to teach them to read. I got hundreds of books and just let them read anything. I got picture books, hundreds from the library, and let them just take them home. There's more than one part to the solution, but I just think that's unconscionable in our country. So that's not going to be that way anymore in 10 years in the entire world. So people can read manuals about crops and what, having wholesome nourishment for their crops. It'll change politics and health and science. Great scientists might emerge from these communities where children now can't read. In African countries, there are 15 countries that have less than 50% literacy. And they're talking about a 2nd grade level because they say the US has 99% literacy. It's just, this could be the biggest change ever, I think. And support, we'll also do things like support hand washing when we're playing games about water. There's lots we can do building in social health issues and so forth while we teach the reading and the math. Mm-hmm. And learning about other cultures as well, and really cherishing them and enjoying them. The music and art and poetry and dance of other cultures can be woven into this, so we have an appreciation of one another. And I think there won't be us and them the same, because if you all speak the same language and you've sung the same music when you were a little child, there isn't other, there's just us. And I think it's time for the world to be that way.
Mm. So, Ann, there's so much inspiration to take away from your story, whether it's all the success you had with Learning Company, being a serial social entrepreneur. Personally, I admire how you live up in the redwoods in the middle of the forest, and I can tell through our conversation before this just how much you love the lifestyle you've created for yourself. But for someone listening to this interview, what's the one thing they hope you take away from your story?
That you could do anything you set out to do. My mother taught me that when I was a little girl, and you just have to be willing to pay the price. And sometimes the price is very high. I've been kicked out of company after company. Other people have, the Learning Company was sold for $660 million. I couldn't afford to keep my stock, so I got almost nothing. You just have to be willing to take the difficulties that come with this kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And what I found over and over is that people come along. I've never lacked for anything, but I think that you just do what's in your heart to do and start it. I just read something recently about, my dad told me that if you don't strike at a ball, you've missed it. You have to try, and you have to get busy, not just think about it or talk about it. You have to actually start to do it, even if you don't know how. And I certainly didn't know how, but I'm amazed at how many people will help that are incredible. My circle of people who help is unbelievable, and many have been with me 30 or 40 years, and they still hang out with me. Even if I fail, I go on. I'm doing that right now. I'm not funded right now but I will be soon, even though I'm 73.
Yeah, that was my next question. Andrew and I know as entrepreneurs, and there's good days and there's bad days. And so my question to you, and it's my favorite question to ask on these podcasts, is what keeps you going every day?
The children.
Yeah.
A school gave me an office for free, and it's actually a whole building with a warehouse. It's gorgeous. And yesterday I was there with a friend who was volunteering, and the children walked by. Well, that just lifts my spirits even to see them and to know I get to play with them. I tutor children, and I'm just fascinated with what happens with them at the learning edge, and have done that all my life. I always work directly with children, no matter what's, I've worked with 15 countries about the education system for the whole country and things like that. But it's the actual children that keep me going, and the possibility that we really can do something for them. But it's going to take more than my lifetime to pull it off. So I'd love to build a team to carry it on. I haven't done that yet.
Well, Ann, that actually leads into the last question we have for today, which is how someone can get in touch with you, whether it's websites to check out to learn more about your products, or you stated earlier looking for collaborators. Just what's the best way to get in touch, either website or email addresses?
Yes, my email address is Ann, ANN, at learningfriends.com. And there's a website for the last, I think it's 9 apps at readerbee.com. And there's a learningfriends.com website that has my biography and a lot about our plans. I have a plan for investors if it's in an area that I can send them information. So that's how to reach me. I'm also on Skype and Viber and all the different ways to talk to me, but you can start with an email.
Perfect. Well, Ann, we really appreciate your time today and just all the amazing insight you shared. I know there's going to be a ton of entrepreneurs really inspired from these takeaways.
I can't wait, and I don't care if they're students. I'll talk to them. I start with people in high school earlier, because if they want to do something, I can learn from them and they can learn from me.
Awesome.
And thank you.
No, thank you for the work you're doing in this world. It's amazing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ann.
Bye-bye.